In 480 BCE, the Persian Emperor Xerxes stood at the edge of Greece with the largest army the ancient world had ever assembled. The ground trembled beneath the feet of his soldiers. The sea disappeared beneath the hulls of his warships. He had every reason to believe he was untouchable. Within a year, the unraveling had already begun, and he never saw it coming. To understand how Persia fell, you first have to understand just how dominant it was. At its peak, the Persian Empire didn't just rule a large territory, it redefined what an empire could be. Stretching from the shores of the Mediterranean all the way to the Indus River, it swallowed entire civilizations whole. Modern-day Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, all of it under one crown. But Persia wasn't just big, it was sophisticated. While other powers ruled through brute force, Persia built roads. The royal roads stretched nearly 2,700 kilometers, connecting the empire's far corners and allowing messages, merchants, and armies to move with terrifying efficiency. They developed a governance system so advanced that conquered peoples were often allowed to keep their languages, their religions, their customs. Cyrus the Great didn't just conquer, he absorbed. He was, by ancient standards, remarkably tolerant. This was an empire that didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a civilization, and for a time, nothing on earth could touch it. Then, in 486 BCE, Darius I died, and the first crack appeared. His son Xerxes I inherited the throne, and with it, an unfinished war. Darius had already clashed with the Greeks and suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. That wound was still fresh. Xerxes felt the weight of his father's unfinished business, and he made a decision that would echo through centuries. He would finish it. He would crush Greece once and for all. It looked, on paper, like it couldn't fail. Xerxes assembled a force so massive that ancient historians struggled to describe it. He bridged the Hellespont with boats, literally building a road across the sea, and marched his army into Europe. But war is never just math. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small Greek force slowed the Persian advance long enough to change the psychological momentum of the entire campaign. And then came Salamis. 480 BCE, the Bay of Salamis, the Greek commander Themistocles lured the massive Persian fleet into a narrow strait, deliberately. In open water, Persian numbers were overwhelming. In a narrow channel, those same numbers became a liability. Persian ships collided with each other. The Greek triremes, lighter and more maneuverable, tore through the chaos. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on the hillside as his fleet was destroyed in front of him. In a single afternoon, the myth of Persian invincibility was shattered. He returned home having lost thousands of men, hundreds of ships, and something far harder to replace, the fear his empire had always inspired. Here is where most people misunderstand history. Persia didn't fall the day it lost at Salamis. Empires don't collapse in an afternoon. They collapse slowly, then suddenly. The defeat triggered a chain reaction. The treasury was drained. Subject peoples who had once submitted quietly began testing the edges of Persian authority. Regional governors, the satraps, began accumulating power for themselves, sensing that the center could no longer hold. Revolts broke out across the empire. One after another, they had to be put down at enormous cost, and the throne itself became a battleground. The decades following Xerxes were filled with assassinations and power struggles. Emperors were murdered by their own family members. Sons turned on fathers, brothers turned on brothers. Every succession became a crisis, and every crisis weakened the empire further. The Persian Empire was eating itself alive. By the time a young Macedonian king named Alexander crossed into Persian territory in 334 BCE, he wasn't conquering an empire at its peak. He was finishing one that was already dying. Alexander moved with extraordinary speed, winning battle after battle against Persian forces that were numerically superior but strategically fractured. At Gaugamela in 331 BCE, the last great Persian army collapsed. Emperor Darius III fled and was later murdered by his own men. In 330 BCE, Alexander entered Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire. its temples, its palaces, its towering monuments to Persian greatness. He burned it to the ground. The empire that had once stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus, the empire that had built roads across continents and governed millions with remarkable sophistication, was gone. But here's the thing worth sitting with. Persia wasn't destroyed by Alexander. Alexander was just the final chapter. The real destruction began generations earlier, in the decisions of one emperor who confused ambition with strategy. Xerxes didn't just lose a battle at Salamis, he broke the psychological contract that held his empire together. The belief that Persia was unstoppable. Once that belief was gone, everything else followed. The greatest empires in history rarely die from a single blow. They die from within, from flawed leadership, from succession crises, from the slow erosion of the trust and fear that once held everything in place. Persia's story isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for how power really works and how quickly it can unravel when the wrong decisions are made at the wrong moment.